Welcome to another episode in the Understanding Espresso series. This is a series where we go in, look at one variable at a time in the espresso process, how you can tweak it, change it, understand it to get better tasting espresso at home. Now, this particular video wasn't actually planned to be a part of the series because I don't really consider time to be a variable that we change. I consider time to be an output, a result of the variables that we change. But there have been so many questions about brew time that I figured it was a good idea to invest a little bit of time in talking about it and talking about understanding it and what to worry about, when to start timing, all of that kind of stuff. Now, to start with, I will define brew time, which for me and for the context of this video is the time from pushing start on the machine until pushing stop. It is the entire duration of your brewing process. Now, in many cases, the recommendation for espresso is the brewing time should be in the region of 25 to 30 seconds. And that is a great rule for people getting into espresso. The way espresso works is that you have ideally a consistent water pressure coming in, right? Your pump in your machine is going to push water forwards in a consistent manner. That might be a straight, flat 9 bars of pressure the whole time. That might be a kind of pressure profile of some sort, but ideally, it's repeatable. And the time it takes to push a fixed amount of water through the coffee tells you how much resistance there was to that pressure. It doesn't tell you much more than that, but it'll tell you how difficult it was for the water to get through that cake of coffee, through that puck in the portafilter. And as we talked about, you can impact how difficult it is to get through the amount of coffee that's there. Obviously, more coffee will add more resistance, less will add less resistance, and how fine the coffee is ground. The finer the pieces, the better they fit together, the smaller the gaps between them, and again, the harder it is for the water to flow through. The reason I think it's important to record and pay attention to brew time is that it gives you an idea of how effectively you have made a change. If you're working with a fixed recipe and you change your grind a little bit, well, that change to brew time will give you an idea of the level of impact that your variable change has had on the brewing process. Just because your espresso took 25 to 30 seconds to brew doesn't make it good, doesn't mean it went well, doesn't mean that you've got all the other variables right. So I don't like to lead with brew time as a very important thing, but generally speaking, it's good to start in that 25 to 30 second window. And it's not because water and coffee need to be in contact for that amount of time. It's just that the kind of grind size that you would need for the kind of dose that you would typically use, well, that exposes the right kind of surface area of ground coffee, meaning enough of the coffee is soluble that the resulting espresso tastes good. Now, there are people who advocate for timing from when liquid appears until you push stop. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I understand their idea behind it. They're saying if you start to mess with your pre-infusion times, whether you've done a short pre-infusion or a long pre-infusion, your kind of flowing espresso time tends to be similar for good shots. And I get that. And I accept that that is true and may be useful to some people. But for me, it's more about, do you understand the rule well enough to begin to break it and have some interesting and different results? Once you understand that you can manipulate your pre-infusion time quite dramatically, you are no longer a beginner in the espresso game. You're someone a little bit more advanced, a little bit further down their journey, and you should have played around with the 25 to 30 second rule and understood it and had some good results from it, but then be making intentional changes to break that rule to get to a particular result. I think where the 25 to 30 second guidance window is most useful is for beginners to intermediate espresso makers. Brew time is obviously still useful to professional baristas as well, but they're thinking a lot about consistency. Am I brewing 100, 200, 500 espressos today, all within the same kind of parameters? Am I hitting my numbers? Am I doing a consistent job? Because they're not going to taste any of those shots that they serve. They don't have that kind of taste feedback other than pulling a shot now and again for themselves. But if you're just serving it, well, you need as much data as possible to help you understand, has this gone well or has this gone badly? Just because a shot brewed outside of that window doesn't make it bad. I made a video a little while ago about Chris Hendon's paper that covered brewing espresso in like 16 seconds and how and why that was good. I'll leave a link up here if you want to go and watch that. But that's very much about understanding the rules, understanding the kind of mechanics behind what's going on, and breaking the rules to get to a different kind of a place. Going back to it, if you prefer to time from liquid appearing, and certainly some of the smart scales on the market will begin to time from liquid hitting the scale and will time that for you, if that's useful to you, that's okay. Again, it's just an interesting result. It's just an interesting data point from your manipulation of the espresso recipe. It's not a target necessarily. It's the taste is the target. The brew time, again, is just data. However, for me, I would rather talk about the time in which coffee and water are mixing and are together, and if that means it's a 45-second shot, well, if I can't communicate that there's a very long pre-infusion at very low pressure before ramping up and then a decline in the back of it, then there's no point having my recipe to begin with. You're not understanding what I'm trying to achieve, and so me just saying I had a great espresso that took 45 seconds to brew is irrelevant. It's not useful information in that regard. I do want to talk a little bit more about the impact of pressure and flow on brew times, but first, a quick ad from this video's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community full of thousands of classes for creative and curious people like you and me. The breadth of courses on Skillshare is huge, and so there are definitely things that very obviously appeal to people like you and me, things that are culinary, be it techniques or recipes or understanding things like wine a little bit more, but there's a ton of other creative stuff that you can indulge in. Personally, I used to make a lot of music, and I've kind of stopped because I've become, to be honest, a little intimidated by some of the software that I just don't understand the same way. Brian Jackson has a great 4-part series on Ableton Live, the software that I'm trying to relearn again. Now, Skillshare is great value. It's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription, and that gives you access to absolutely everything, unlimited premium classes. If you want to check it out, the first 1,000 people to click the link and sign up in my description below will get 2 months of Skillshare Premium for free. Imagine what you could learn in the next 60 days. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So way back in the day, a long time ago, 10 years ago now, I think, I was sort of hired by La Marzocco to do some work when they had just released the Strada. And it was my first time really experimenting with kind of structured pressure profiling. And I learned some interesting stuff. I had in the past had a pressure profiling machine that ran on a scuba tank of air under a counter, and it was terrifying and incredible and sort of home built, but that's another story for another day. The Strada let you create draw-out profiles and pull shots that way. And I was kind of intrigued that if you used pressure to change your contact time, right? Because we associate contact time very strongly with extraction from stuff like infusion brewing. If you leave coffee and water in contact for 10 seconds more, in theory, you should have more extraction as a result. But in my testing, where I would pull the shot as normal, and then in the last half of the shot I would begin to reduce the pressure to varying amounts, by keeping the recipe the same grams of coffee and the same grams of coffee out and the same grind setting, by reducing the pressure I had slower and slower shots. The contact time got longer and longer, but the extraction did not go up. I didn't see any increase in extraction from reducing the pressure in this particular way, which I thought was really interesting. And it said to me that extraction is really down to how much coffee have you got, how much water have you got, and how fine is the coffee, how much surface area is exposed. Once I kind of understood it and thought about it that way, it made espresso a little bit easier. Similarly, a very long pre-infusion time does add some extraction, but you'll have a faster flow afterwards, and so generally speaking, a long pre-infusion doesn't up your extraction unless you're grinding significantly finer. Certainly preventing channeling, evenness of extraction, has a role in increasing your extraction from the espresso, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're just talking about brew time. So to summarize, if you're at the beginning or just kind of getting into your espresso journey, I think the 25 to 30 second brew time rule is very helpful to get your ideal weight in, weight out in that time frame, will generally speaking get you to good. If you're brewing with a machine that brews in unconventional ways, you might be brewing with a lever machine that has long pre-infusion potential, you might be brewing with something that has pressure or flow profiling potential. Yes, you can break that rule. Yes, you probably should break that rule. But if your first machine is something that's complex, espresso will very quickly seem overwhelming and incredibly difficult. Getting your head around what is good, getting a solid foundation of espresso brewing, I think is very helpful. And so that's why I think brew time in this regard is a good target. But I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this. Has this made a little bit more sense in the world of espresso? Have I just confused you further? Is there an aspect of brew time that I didn't talk about? I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.